Welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you joined us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 80, we're joined by David Flench. David is the president and CEO of the Medical Fitness Association. As we'll talk about in this podcast, the MFA is quite possibly the only group in existence right now that is actively and directly working towards solving the wellness paradox. And they are integrating and collaborating with healthcare. And in this conversation with David, we're going to dive deep into what that looks like and why that's necessary for the future of healthcare. This is a conversation I'm incredibly excited to have because, as I think you'll hear in this episode, the medical fitness difference is something that is A, necessary in healthcare economically, and B, can really not only make a significant difference on population health, but can greatly alter the trajectory of the fitness industry if done properly. Any additional information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 80. Please enjoy this conversation with David Flench. Today, we're delighted to be joined by David Flench. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mike.
I'm very excited to have this conversation because, as David's going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, he's the president and CEO of the Medical Fitness Association, which is something that's very near and dear to my heart that I'm involved in. And it's also where I think the wellness paradox has the opportunity to be truly solved by some of the things that they do in medical fitness. But I'm going to let David speak to that more directly. But David, before we launch into some more things about the Medical Fitness Association and the medical model, why don't you just give us a little bit of an idea of your background to provide some context for the discussion?
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, so I started in exercise science as my bachelor's degree. And so I got that from the Ohio State University, and later went on to get a master's degree. That's an MBA. So I really spent the majority here of my career, which spans over 20 years, in medical fitness industry. So I started at a very comprehensive, large size medical fitness center called the McConnell Heart Health Center in Columbus, Ohio. Then I ended up moving down to the Florida Keys and ran a wellness center down there in Tavernier called the Mariners Wellness Center. Spent about 4 years there. We integrated with a diabetes clinic, so it was part of a hospital, but opened up that. So did some great things down there, and then moved up to Sarasota to take on that role for a few years, and then my most recent one before coming to MFA was coming up to Greenfield, Indiana, where I currently live, and running the Hancock Wellness Centers. And so we started with one facility there and transformed it into a fully integrated part of the healthcare system and hospital. And that became a certified facility, and we had so much success there. We built 2 more over the course of the next 9 or 10 years. And so then when the MFA president CEO role came up, that was something that I felt was just a real natural fit. I've been part of the MFA in a variety of ways for really all of my career. Committees, the board of directors, culminating in the chairman of the board position. I was a lead examiner for facility certifications, so I'm very familiar with that, and it's always been my number one professional organization. So it's been almost 2 years now running the show, and things are going great here.
Yeah, and we're going to dive in a little bit more to the Medical Fitness Association in a second, but I can say the centers that Hancock built there, absolutely beautiful, and the new PAL Center one that I've been to, it's kind of the flagship that you guys have. They're just incredible. If any of our listeners are ever in that area, it's definitely, I don't know if you would actually be in that area for anything in particular, but if you were, it'd be a great place to stop by. And Joel, who took over for you, and his team over there are absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say coming to Indianapolis would be the reason. We're just about 20 miles east of downtown Indy. So, not as much to do out here in, Greenfield, Indiana, but if you're ever in Indianapolis, shoot over and I'll run you through those facilities, because you're right. They're world class. We just, we built one. It was nicer than the first. We built the third, and it was nicer than the second. So, it's a wonderful setup there.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the Medical Fitness Association. I often say that the MFA is one of the best kept secrets in the industry, that we need to not keep a secret anymore. So in the interest of doing exactly that, tell us about the MFA, its mission, and who it serves.
Sure. So the Medical Fitness Association really is all about advancing knowledge, networking, and influence for the medical fitness industry, medical fitness professionals and facilities. We're a nonprofit professional membership organization, and we support these professionals and these facilities in the medical fitness industry. We provide resources really aimed at improving the operational success and integration within the healthcare continuum. We provide industry standards, education programs, certification opportunities, benchmark data, professional development, and really a lot of networking opportunities.
That's a great way to kind of cast the net over all the MFA does. And as we dive a little bit deeper here, I think we can go back to some of the things that you talked about, because a number of those things, the benchmarking data, the facility certification, the education, the networking, I've seen the benefit of these firsthand, and I will want to circle back around to those. But I think it's important that we level set everyone to start here around what is the medical fitness difference. I mean, you hear fitness and you think traditional commercial health club, and like they got a treadmill. A medical fitness center has a treadmill. They've got aerobics classes. Medical fitness center has aerobics. So what's the medical fitness difference?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I get asked all the time, and I would say the medical fitness model is basically, it's a layer on top of your traditional commercial fitness model. Mm-hmm. So medical fitness center is a medically integrated facility. It focuses on prevention, treating lifestyle disease, chronic diseases, illnesses, through really participating in physical activity, nutrition programs, programs specific to each chronic disease, and as well as health and wellness education. And so, like you mentioned, and I often say it's an analogy of hardware and software, right? So your hardware is your equipment, your treadmills, your elliptical, strength machines, free weights, pool, basketball court, group exercise classes, all of the things that visually, when you first walk into the facility, you think, oh, okay, I know where I am. So the hardware is very similar. It's the software that's very different. So the programs that are installed in a medical fitness center are really a lot of what, defines that difference. And so, it'll have, as I mentioned, chronic disease programs specific to multiple chronic diseases such as, diabetes, hypertension, Parkinson's disease, cancer, deconditioned and overweight programs, arthritis, all, you could go on and on for that. So in order to serve those populations, and not to mention just senior population, deconditioned populations, you need to have highly qualified staff. And another part of it is really having a medical director or some physician advisory committee that can function in a really a role of advisory oversight and even a liaison to the rest of the medical community. But I'd say also, something really important is a medical fitness center often is very focused on delivering outcomes, tracking, and letting these programs complement a hospital's other services, other clinical services. Oftentimes rehab can transition right into the medical fitness centers, whether it be your physical therapy, occupational therapy, your cardiac rehab, your pulmonary rehab. All of those are natural transition programs for the medical fitness center. And really, another thing is now as healthcare moves into more value-based population health models, wellness centers, medical fitness model, that really plays into that strategy. It's part of a good population health strategy that can really help a hospital, a healthcare system. With that, oftentimes decreasing readmissions into a hospital is just a huge part of what they're aiming to do. But also keeping the community healthy as possible overall, so that they can try to eliminate or at least reduce some of the real costly healthcare services that go on. So, I'd say when somebody asks about the model for medical fitness, I would point to medical oversight and integration. I'd point to the quality management and outcomes focus. Pre-participation screening is a big part of what happens there, as well as safety, risk management, emergency preparedness. And then again, our clinical fitness programs and services, the highly qualified staff, a real focus on cleanliness, and finally, I'd say the individualized approach to each member.
Yeah. So when you talk about this as the software analogy, I mean, this is the latest state-of-the-art, most advanced software. And when you say this, and I've been a part of many of these conversations, this isn't to disparage or speak ill of the commercial fitness industry. It's just a very different model. That software and hardware serves a different purpose than what medical fitness serves. Touch on that difference real quick, because I know I walk around your centers there, the New Pal Center. It's not the same group of people that if I walked around a Planet Fitness or a Powerhouse. So talk about that difference.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I agree. The traditional commercial fitness centers have a great place in our industry. A medical fitness center might not be for everybody. However, I would say, a lot of people who are athletic or very fit sometimes really enjoy our facilities because of the cleanliness, of the, state-of-the-art equipment a lot of times. But yeah, I think, there's a lot of, the commercial fitness centers always are trying to expand outside of their 20%. You hear that a lot, the 20%, and, how do we reach the other 80%? And medical fitness really does hit that other 80%, because oftentimes the people who are in a medical fitness center, it's their first experience with any type of fitness programs, right? So they've never been a member of a gym, and that's for a variety of reasons. But they come to a medical fitness center often because their doctors told them, or they've had a health scare and they want to do something about that. And so a lot of times they'll come to a medical fitness center who has an environment created so that it's less intimidating. It's more focused. It's focused on wellness and whole health, holistic health. And I would say, I can remember when I first started at Hancock, and I was brought in, and we started talking about the medical fitness model, and people got a little nervous. We held a town hall that the community was invited to, and members came to, and we talked about here's what's going to happen, and people were really worried that this was going to be only for rehab, or only for people in wheelchairs and walkers, and we were going to get rid of everything else. And I had to explain it's that layer on top. We're not getting rid of the high intensity training, the boot camps, and the personal training and Zumba class. I had my CEO of the hospital call me early on and say, Dave, I'm getting complaints from members saying that they're worried about the Zumba class going away. I mean, can you imagine a hospital CEO calling you up and saying, I got a call about Zumba?
Oh.
And so I had to say, no, that's not what we're doing. We keep all of those things. And in fact, these popular programs are still really important to the operations. And a lot of times they can even be scaled to different populations. If you talk about Zumba in particular, they have Zumba Gold, so it's for the senior population. And, there's a lot of examples like that. And so it's really much more of the population feels comfortable in this setting. I can remember, we installed carpet around some of the equipment to give it more of a comfortable home-based feeling. And so, you don't have as much of the hardcore, rubber floored the entire facility. You soften that a little bit. And so, the rest of the population who may not be comfortable going to a Planet or a Gold's or, some of these types of places do feel comfortable. But, then again, before I left, we were implementing CrossFit.
Yes.
So, it spans the entire spectrum, really.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I've seen that CrossFit space at New Palette. It's beautifully integrated in, but you are right. The feel is softened, and it's designed to cater to a slightly more mature demographic. I do think it's important to point out as we dive deeper into this conversation, because I want to transition into what role does medical fitness play in our post-COVID world. One thing we haven't touched on, and I'll just touch on it briefly, and I'll borrow this from our good friend and mentor Doug Reibley, and Doug, who is one of the godfathers of medical fitness, although I always hesitate to call him that because I feel like it makes him feel old. But he always reminds me and many people that the value in healthcare systems for doing this is that their reimbursements are going down and their costs are going up. And the current non-prevention based model is unsustainable. You mentioned readmissions, and there's bundling of payments, and there's all kinds of incentive for healthcare to actually keep people healthy and out of a hospital bed, whereas for decades that hasn't been the case. So with that being said, talk about where you view medical fitness playing a role in population health and healthcare as we come out of COVID here.
Yeah, and well said, and you're right. Doug, I'm a disciple of his, and I can remember 20 years ago when I attended my first Medical Fitness Association conference, and he was the chairman of the board, and was very gracious to spend some time with me. And since then we've become great friends. And you're right, he's getting older, but I won't tell him you said that. We'll just let him hear it on this. but the healthcare system has been changing for a number of years, but I do think that COVID, the pandemic, really accelerated what was starting to happen. And you touched on some of the factors that are happening, and I can recall our monthly meetings at the hospital at Hancock, and some of the review was about the percent of reimbursement, and it was typically in the 20 to 30% of charges. So it's very hard for a system to survive on those types of reimbursement models. So
just to be clear what you're saying there, that means if they billed a dollar, they were getting 20 to 30 cents on the dollar. I don't think all of our audience actually realizes that just because a healthcare system says that they need $500 from an insurer from a procedure or appointment, they're not getting that. And to your point, I mean, it could be 20, 30, 40 cents on the dollar. So not sustainable.
Right. The negotiated, payment it keeps getting cut. And not only are there new incentives for this value-based, instead of volume-based, but there are de-incentives, to doing poorly and letting people come back to your hospital within 30 days of being treated for a condition. So yeah, and I got some data that I'll share. So in 2020, there were 513 ACOs, accountable care organizations, that participated in the Medicare Shared Savings Program. And 67% of those ACOs earned shared savings payments of almost $2.3 billion.
Wow.
And so, and we've got now a little more than half of community hospitals are participating in these ACOs. And so, the savings to Medicare was just under $2 billion. So it's the fourth year of net savings for Medicare. And so these are some of the things that they've been trying to put into place so that they can get some of the costs down in healthcare. And so really, until some of these payment reform changes have happened, the changes were extremely slow to happen. But you put money next to it, and things change, right? So, but I do think the pandemic kind of jump started this, because hospitals started to see a decrease in their volumes. And so when you see decrease in volumes, your revenue isn't there, right? So, people weren't getting the elective procedures. They weren't, coming in person to visits. And so, a lot of hospitals were starting to look at, okay, what are some other ways to do business that aren't so reliant on that? Or how do we get further into this, population health payment reform? And so I think medical fitness centers are really positioned well right now to, be part of that solution. I think you can also look at the general population, and there's a definite increase in interest in wellness. Whether it be better sleep, managing your stress, just taking care of yourself more holistically than in the past. I think that is something that is very clear. And really, there's a lot of good data that suggests that being in good physical shape has really had a protective factor against COVID compared to those who were, less conditioned. So I think the other part of the medical fitness model, and I briefly touched on this before, was, we've always had a strong focus on cleanliness. I think for years there's been this, perception of the fitness, world and gyms in general that they're not clean. And, a lot of times when people would come into our facilities, they'd say, wow, it's so clean in here. And, part of that is being, part of a hospital system and having some, high standards along those lines. But, in the pandemic, what did we see? Cleaning wipes everywhere, hand sanitizers everywhere. And, we were already doing a lot of that. So, we were kind of ahead of the game, I think, in that respect, and continue to keep it as part of that, part of operations. But I think, really, the topic of population health could be an entire podcast on its own.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode.
It could right.
Yeah. No, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about all that. And there's so much rich information in there. But I mean, to go back to the being ahead of the game thing, the first fitness organization that published any guidelines during COVID about what a safe facility looks like and how they should be reopened was the MFA, and it was extensive. And I know here in the state of Michigan, where I'm on our state alliance board, we use those guidelines to develop our own guidelines. So you guys in this space were well ahead of the commercial space. But something you said to go back to, medical fitness has been around for a couple of decades now. This is not just something that started last week, but there's this big inflection point now because the financial incentives are changing. And I think we can't stress that enough in this conversation, is that it's always been a beneficial thing to do, but the incentives weren't properly aligned before. Now the incentives are aligned to keep people healthy as much as it is to treat them when they're sick, injured, or ill.
That's right. That's a great point, Mike.
So, fitness professionals are listening to this, and I hope they're getting excited about the medical fitness opportunity, because as I've talked about with my team, and in the interest of full disclosure, my commercial fitness company is currently making a transition to medical fitness. And one of the things that I say all the time is we are transitioning from fitness jobs to healthcare jobs. And that should get everybody really excited, because there's a lot more career stability and I think, potential financial success. Not that anyone's in the fitness industry for the money, but you at least want a stable paycheck. I think a lot of fitness professionals are listening to this going, wow, this is a really appealing thing for me to consider. So, I go back to you at the beginning of your career where you're trying to navigate the path. What would you say to fitness professionals about how they can engage with opportunities in the medical fitness space?
Yeah, and I can remember back in the beginning of my career, you're coming out of college and you're not exactly sure what you want to do, but you've got this degree, right? So you've got a lot of knowledge and you're ready to go. And not every space in the fitness industry you wouldn't consider them careers, I don't think.
Right.
In a lot of these areas, a lot of people come out and they think, oh, I want to, go on to do physical therapy or, something like that. And that's fine too. But, medical fitness and especially when you're part of a good healthcare system, you're part of that entire organization, that really does start to feel like a career. And you see people in the medical fitness industry part of, it for their entire, 30, 40 years. And medical fitness has been around since, I would say, the late 80s, early 90s is when it really started, being visible, seeing more and more places pop up. But, I would recommend, just like I did early on in my career, I joined as a member of MFA and I attended a conference. As I mentioned, Doug right there, he was a guru at that time. He's even more of it now, but, he and several others that I would put in the same, pool of people, were very gracious with spending time. And I think you find that in the medical fitness industry. When you come to our conferences, you don't get just these groups of people who, keep to themselves. It's all about, how can we help others? Because a lot of times there's not significant local competition. So you're talking to somebody, that you don't have to worry about them stealing your members and, all of that kind of stuff. But become a member. And of course you hear that coming out of the president and CEO's mouth, and you think, well, of course he wants you to become a member, but really, it's a great network to be part of. And, Marianne often says, this is being a member makes you part of a community. So you don't have to go it alone. You don't have to, invent everything on your own. Right. So I think, then it's a matter of getting involved. And I often, preach that you really get out what you put in. And it's just so true. I think, I've attended probably 20 some conferences in a row, and I love being around the people and, bouncing ideas, sharing, our best practices and hearing of others. And, it's rare that I don't, leave a conference feeling like, oh, I picked up something that I can put into place operationally. You gotta put it in though. Right. So, then there's opportunities for joining, committees and task forces and, minimally register for some webinars, hear what people are talking about. But I think, those are some of the first things to do. Once somebody gets in and starts to figure out what the medical fitness model is all about, then there's certification, and we offer a couple different ones. The first for an individual, if they want to become a medical fitness facility director, we have a certification around that. It's really geared towards, I would say, new managers or maybe mid-level managers, or even those aspiring to become, attain a management position. I think that really helps demonstrate the proficiency and understanding the concepts and application of the medical fitness model. So there's that one. And then secondly, we have our facility certification. And so, taking on that is a huge endeavor. It's based on our standards and guidelines book that we actually have a new edition of that book coming out in a couple of weeks here that we've been working on. And so that certification, it's very rigorous, usually takes about a year at least to prepare for. It's got 148 standards that a facility is evaluated on. But, really going through the preparation to become certified, either individually or the facility, that really then I would say takes a person to the next level, right? So, get involved, use your network that you gain to, be a resource for you. And I mean, Mike, I can't tell you how many times throughout my career I sent an email or picked up the phone to contact a colleague and say, look, here's the issue that we have. Have you had this? And what have you done? And, it's just invaluable. It really is.
Yeah, and I concur. I mean, I got involved as an individual because I was intrigued by it back in 2016. And that was the thing that I was most struck by initially, just the willingness of everyone to connect and network, and just the formal education that the MFA provides, certainly, but the informal networking and education. And I feel like anyone's associated with the MFA, you referenced Marianne Murphy, who's the director of marketing for the MFA earlier. I feel like I can email Marianne and say, hey, I'm dealing with this issue. do you know someone that could help me? And within a day, I would have a Zoom meeting set up with them. And so I can't agree more. If you're hearing this and you're listening to this and you're saying, wow, this is really intriguing. What's my first step? Your first step is to just dive in and get to know people in the medical fitness ecosystem. And we're recording this podcast early, but it's going to be dropping on the first day of the national conference, which is down in Orlando this year. But there are many events and opportunities to connect with the MFA. You mentioned webinars. Always, every month, there's a couple of MFA webinars that are being put on a variety of different topics. I mean, I've given webinars on everything from programming to leadership and relationship building and everywhere in between. And there's so many people that are willing to give their knowledge. And we'll make sure on the show notes page, we link up to some of the information on webinars and how you can connect with the MFA a little bit more. But it really is one of those groups that if you're going to find out the value that you can receive, but also the value you can give, you just have to start interacting with them.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
So where is the best place to go if they want to find out more about you and the MFA?
Well, let's just stick to MFA. They don't need to know about me so much, but
fair enough.
If they really want to, get to know me, come to one of our events. I'll be happy to hang out for a bit. But seriously speaking, our website, medicalfitness.org, that's a great starting point. And certainly, as I mentioned, our webinars, our live events, that's a great way to find out more. But yeah, jump on our website. You'll see a lot of different things that that and our social media. We are pretty active on that. We have we share a lot of our strategic partner information, industry partners. So I would say go there, find out about it, but jump on the website, maybe look into a membership. An individual membership won't drain your bank.
Yeah, and we will link up to all that on the show notes page, just so everyone has the opportunity to be able to access it. David, this has been a great conversation, and you mentioned the population health discussion, which we're probably going to have you back on to talk about another point, because there's so much nuance to what we talked about here, and we just scratched the surface. And I know both you and I and a lot of our colleagues believe what we talked about here is the future of healthcare. This is where healthcare is going. The healthcare that was volume-based and sick care-based of the past is going away and moving towards care that is more quality based, and medical fitness facilities and medical fitness professionals are on the tip of that spear. And to that end, it leads naturally into my final question, which is around the premise of the wellness paradox. And I'm really interested to get your answer, because on some level, fitness professionals are already addressing the wellness paradox. And as I define it, that's the gap in trust and communication, an interaction between medical professionals and fitness professionals. From all of your vast experience, for the fitness professionals that are listening, what's one piece of advice you can give them how to close off that gap?
Yeah, that's really a great question, because you're right. There tends to be this gap, and there really shouldn't be. When you think about it, we're all trying to get people healthy, or get people back to health, and So, but I would say the one thing I would look to is to build some relationships with healthcare providers. So oftentimes a lot of these people are working out in a fitness center already. And those people are great people to start with, because not only are they, doctors and nurses and physical therapists and, all kinds of other healthcare providers, but they're interested then in their personal health and fitness. And so I'd say, starting with those types of people, a relationship that's built like that can really break down walls and, minimize that gap. And so once you get to know somebody and understand what they do, it's also educating them on what you do.
Yeah. Right.
And so what are your qualifications? What are some of the outcomes you're seeing with the members in your programs? how can you help them? One thing that we did at Hancock is, I thought it was great. When a physician started working at the hospital, they went through an orientation. So a bunch of department heads came in and talked about their services. And we had the opportunity to do that with our wellness centers. And so you really got to let them understand we're not just, any old place. Here are some of our qualifications. And then, giving them some of the results from our programs. We had one program that we were able to show a reduction in hypertension by, it was some crazy amount, 40% or something like that within the first few, months. And so, it's very comparable to what a person could achieve through medication. And so, the point was, let us be part of the solution. Let us be part of how we can help you and your patients. And we're getting very good results. So I think, doing that, we oftentimes would invite people to experience something themselves. So come over for this program. We'll show you what the intake looks like. That didn't always happen for the busiest of folks, but that type of thing really helps build these relationships that are needed to close a gap. But I'll say as a caveat, you better have high quality programs, and you better have well credentialed staff, and be able to provide their patients an exceptional experience and be able to deliver on what you're promising. Because if you don't have that in place and you try to just get referrals, that's not going to go well for you. That's a short sighted strategy. So I'd say really you got to work on building up these things, and then build that relationship. And once you have both a good relationship with healthcare providers, and you've got a great quality program with staff that put it into place that are just awesome staff, then that's when we're singing Kumbaya, and the stars align and things work really well.
Build relationships, but do it right. David Flench, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
My pleasure, Mike.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with David as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares really do make a difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 80. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next week, please be well.